What happens when a billionaire tech mogul and a seasoned Supreme Court justice meet at the crossroads of personal experience and policy? A jaw-dropping moment unfolds, leaving the entire courtroom in tears. But this isn't just another legal battle. It's a pivotal clash over rural America's access to the digital age, and it's about to reshape how we think about technology and equity. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below. Where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. In today's video, we're diving deep into a historic moment from the Supreme Court that brought Elon Musk and Justice Amy Coney Barrett face to face over the future of rural internet connectivity. Musk's response to Barrett's skeptical questions went beyond the corporate defense we'd expect, revealing a side of him we've never seen before. His personal journey, paired with heartfelt letters from rural Americans, turned the courtroom into a space for empathy, not just law. This is more than a legal case. It's a transformational moment in how we approach digital access in America. Let's explore how this Supreme Court case could change everything for millions of people living in America's rural heartlands. The tension in the Supreme Court chamber was palpable, the atmosphere charged with anticipation as Justice Amy Coney Barrett turned her gaze toward Elon Musk. It was a rare moment, an intense exchange between a justice and a tech billionaire that would leave a lasting impact on both legal history and the future of rural connectivity in America. With a calm but determined voice, Justice Barrett addressed Musk directly, her words carrying the weight of skepticism. "Mr. Musk," she began, flipping through her notes, "you've repeatedly claimed your satellite internet service primarily benefits rural communities. Yet, your background suggests limited personal experience with rural America's challenges. How can someone who has spent their life in urban tech hubs truly comprehend the telecommunications needs of farmers in Iowa or ranchers in Montana?" The question was sharp, almost accusatory, and it seemed to challenge Musk on a deeply personal level. For many watching, this moment was more than just about the case at hand. It was about testing Musk's authenticity, his connection to the very people his technology was designed to help. Justice Barrett's probing words didn't just question Musk's business model. They questioned his credibility, forcing him to confront whether his high-tech solutions could truly meet the needs of the most underserved, rural parts of America. The case before the Supreme Court, Federal Communications Commission vs. SpaceX, was anything but ordinary. On the surface, it was a legal battle over regulatory authority. The FCC had introduced new regulations that would require SpaceX to reduce the number of its Starlink satellites by 40%, dramatically affecting coverage in rural areas. But beyond the legal arguments, this case was emblematic of a broader struggle. The push to bring high-speed internet to remote, underserved communities, and the challenge of balancing technological advancement with regulatory control. What made this particular argument so compelling, however, was the context. It wasn't just about tech companies and government agencies. It was about real people. Farmers who couldn't connect to online services, students who struggled with remote learning during winter storms, doctors who couldn't provide telemedicine to patients in distant, hard-to-reach areas. Musk's Starlink satellite internet had promised a solution, one that could overcome the geographic barriers traditional internet infrastructure couldn't. But could Musk, the entrepreneur, truly understand the hardships of rural America? And more importantly, did he have the moral and personal grounding to fight for them? As Justice Barrett's piercing question hung in the air, it was clear that this wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was a challenge to Musk's core belief in the mission of Starlink. The other justices in the room, many of whom had been following the technical details of the case closely, now sat up straighter, sensing that the exchange was about to take a profound turn. Musk had to respond not just with facts, but with something more personal, something that would not only convince the court, but show them the human cost of what was at stake. This was a moment where the legal, technical world of the Supreme Court met raw emotion and personal truth, a rare, often unseen aspect of the law. And what Musk was about to say next would shift the tone of the entire proceedings, forever changing how we think about rural access to the digital world. For a moment, the room was still. Elon Musk stood frozen at the podium, his expression unreadable. The customary shuffle of papers, the subtle whispers of attorneys exchanging notes, all seemed to cease. It was as if time itself had paused, the weight of Justice Barrett's pointed question hanging over the room. Musk didn't immediately dive into his prepared defense. He didn't reach for his legal team's talking points. Instead, in a split second, he made a decision that would transform the entire atmosphere of the highest court in the land. Musk set aside the stack of notes in front of him. For the first time, the world would see him not just as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, but as someone who was about to share something deeply personal. The billionaire mogul, known for his cool, calculated persona, was about to reveal an entirely new side of himself, one that would not only challenge Barrett's skepticism, but touch the hearts of everyone in that room. "I appreciate your question about my understanding of rural America's challenges," Musk began, his voice steady but quieter than before. The audience, including the justices, held their breath, leaning in. It was a rare moment in the Supreme Court, where a witness, instead of presenting dry facts, spoke directly from the heart. Musk paused, visibly gathering his thoughts as the chamber waited for what was coming next. He continued, "Contrary to public perception, I wasn't always the person you see today. Before founding my companies, before moving to California, I spent formative years in very different circumstances." These words were a departure from the image most people had of Musk, a visionary CEO focused on Mars colonization and electric cars. What he said next would add layers to the public's perception of him, revealing a story few knew. The room seemed to lean closer as Musk's voice softened, a raw sincerity emerging. "When I first came to North America as a teenager, I worked on my cousin's farm in Saskatchewan, Canada," Musk explained. "Not as the owner's son, not as a visitor, but as labor. I spent months living in a province where towns could be 50 miles apart, where internet wasn't merely slow, it didn't exist for many residents." Justice Barrett, who had started the conversation with sharp skepticism, now seemed to be reconsidering her stance. Her gaze softened, her posture adjusting as she processed Musk's words. Chief Justice Roberts, known for his calm and composed demeanor, leaned in slightly, an indication that Musk's response was not only unexpected but deeply compelling. Even the typically impassive justices like Justice Thomas, who rarely spoke during arguments, seemed more engaged. Musk continued, "Later, when attending college in Pennsylvania, I worked summers in rural areas of the state, including a lumber mill in a town so remote that residents drove 2 hours to reach basic services most Americans access within minutes." With each detail, Musk painted a picture of life in rural America, one that Barrett, despite her extensive legal expertise, might not have fully grasped. These were the experiences that had shaped his understanding of digital isolation long before he became a household name. As Musk spoke, his tone shifted. A touch of emotion was creeping into his voice, an emotion that was rare to see in a man who typically spoke in terms of engineering feats and business triumphs. He paused again, taking a breath, before continuing with a story that hit even closer to home. "What's not in my official biography, Justice Barrett, is that after selling my first software company, I didn't immediately start Tesla or SpaceX. I spent 6 months living in a rural community in Colorado, using a dial-up connection that frequently failed, experiencing firsthand the isolation that comes when digital connectivity is unreliable or absent." There was a silence in the courtroom. Musk's words were not simply a defense of his company or an explanation of how he understood rural connectivity needs. This was a personal testimony, a lived experience that spoke volumes about his motivations and the very core of his commitment to bringing technology to underserved communities. Justice Barrett, whose earlier questioning had been skeptical, now leaned forward, her attention fully fixed on Musk. The other justices exchanged looks, sensing the emotional weight of what Musk was revealing. The audience in the courtroom, likely even those who had initially doubted Musk's connection to rural America, couldn't help but feel the sincerity in his voice. Musk wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was someone who had lived the hardships he was advocating for. Musk, now visibly more comfortable, took a small sip of water, a subtle gesture that indicated a shift in the conversation. He had laid bare a side of himself that few knew, and the transformation was palpable. Justice Barrett's expression was still thoughtful, but she no longer seemed to doubt Musk's understanding of the issue. His words had done something remarkable. They had humanized him. They had turned what was supposed to be a technical regulatory dispute into a powerful conversation about people's real lives, real struggles, and the human costs of digital isolation. At that moment, it became clear that Musk was not just speaking to Justice Barrett. He was speaking to everyone in that room, and by extension, to millions of Americans in rural communities who had long been underserved by the digital revolution. He was asking them all to see what he saw, a rural America that had been left behind in the race for connectivity, and a man who had experienced that isolation firsthand. It was the beginning of a transformation in the courtroom. What had started as a cold, impersonal legal debate was now a deeply emotional exchange, one that could redefine the future of rural internet access in America. As Musk's words hung in the air, the courtroom was still. The shift in tone had been dramatic. The justices, who had been focused on the technicalities of the case just moments earlier, were now caught in a web of personal testimony and real-world implications. The stakes of the case had changed, and it was no longer just about orbital slots, satellite technology, or the precise number of Starlink satellites that could be allowed in space. It was about the lives of rural Americans and whether they would be given a fair shot at digital inclusion. Musk, now that he had shared his personal experiences, continued to address the larger issue at hand. The case before the Supreme Court wasn't just about SpaceX's corporate interests or satellite regulations. It was a matter of whether millions of people in rural America would continue to have access to the modern world through high-speed internet. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, had proposed regulations that would reduce the number of Starlink satellites by 40%, severely limiting the coverage that SpaceX could offer in these remote, underserved regions. These were areas where traditional internet infrastructure simply didn't exist, and for many, Starlink was their only hope for reliable, high-speed internet access. As Musk spoke about his personal experience, his tone shifted again, this time to focus on the technical core of the issue. The regulations proposed by the FCC would disproportionately impact the most remote, isolated communities in America, Musk explained, making a direct connection between the abstract legal arguments and the tangible consequences for rural citizens. For these people, access to the internet isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. It's how they connect to the digital economy, how they access healthcare, education, and even basic services. Without it, they're left behind. Musk emphasized the broader societal implications of the FCC's proposed rules. This isn't just about market share or the financial interests of corporations. This is about whether we're going to allow rural Americans to be a part of the digital future or let them remain isolated and disadvantaged. He continued to make a compelling case for the human aspect of the regulatory decision, pointing out that the proposed rules failed to address the true needs of rural Americans. We can't just look at this in terms of orbital parameters and bandwidth limitations. We have to look at it through the lens of equity, opportunity, and the human cost of digital isolation. His words seemed to resonate with some of the justices who had been skeptical of Musk's motives and understanding of the rural issue. Justice Barrett, in particular, appeared to be reconsidering her earlier stance. While she had begun the questioning with a sharp technical focus, Musk's personal story and passionate defense of rural America had begun to sway her perception. It was clear that this wasn't just another corporate legal battle. This was about a deeper issue of access to technology, and Musk had successfully framed it in a way that moved beyond the traditional arguments of legal doctrine and into the realm of human rights. The courtroom had been tense, but now there was a palpable shift in the mood. The justices were no longer just considering the technical aspects of the case. They were grappling with the profound moral questions Musk had raised. Could they, in good conscience, support a policy that would limit the ability of rural communities to access the internet? Could they side with regulations that would leave people who already had so little in terms of digital access even further behind? But the case wasn't just about Musk's emotional testimony. It was also about the broader legal and regulatory framework that had been established by the FCC. Musk knew that he couldn't rely solely on the emotional appeal of his personal story. He needed to go further, diving into the specifics of the case and explaining why the FCC's regulations were not only misguided but harmful to the very people the regulations were supposed to help. Take a look at the data, Musk continued, turning his attention to the technical aspects of the dispute. The FCC's own analysis shows that the proposed reduction of Starlink satellites would primarily impact rural areas, the very communities we're trying to help. He pointed out that these regions, where population density was too low to justify the installation of traditional internet infrastructure, depended on services like Starlink to bridge the digital divide. This is not just about efficiency in orbit, this is about the survival of rural communities in the digital economy. Justice Kagan, always keen on understanding the broader implications of cases, leaned forward, probing deeper into Musk's argument. So, you're suggesting that the FCC's approach isn't just poorly conceived, but that it could be discriminatory? She asked. That's exactly right, Musk replied with a calm certainty. When regulations disproportionately harm the most vulnerable, those who have no other access to digital services, and do so in a way that doesn't actually solve the problem at hand, we have to ask whether those regulations are serving the public interest. In this case, they're not. They're hurting the people who need access the most. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that Musk wasn't just arguing against the FCC's regulations on a technical level. He was challenging the very notion of what public interest meant in the context of technology policy. The digital divide wasn't just a technical issue. It was a societal issue, one that affected people's ability to access education, healthcare, economic opportunities, and so much more. The legal team representing the FCC, sensing that their case was faltering in the face of Musk's testimony, attempted to regain control of the conversation. The FCC attorney rose to argue that Musk's personal anecdotes, while compelling, did not address the central technical concerns of the case, the need to reduce orbital congestion and frequency allocation. However, the justices were no longer focused solely on those technical aspects. Justice Barrett, who had initially brought up the technical details of the case, now found herself questioning the FCC's narrow focus on orbital parameters. Is it the FCC's position, Barrett asked, that these human impacts, the ability of people to access telemedicine or education, are merely anecdotal and not substantive considerations under the Communications Act's public interest standard? Her challenge was a direct confrontation with the FCC's position, and it revealed a fundamental shift in the proceedings. The justices were no longer treating the case as a mere regulatory dispute. They were recognizing the deeper human impact of their decision. The shift in focus was unmistakable. What had begun as a dry, technical legal argument was now a full-fledged examination of the human cost of digital exclusion. The stakes of the case had been elevated to a level that went far beyond legal precedents and technicalities. It was now about whether the court would recognize that technology, when regulated without regard for its human impact, could perpetuate inequality instead of solving it. And with that, the conversation was no longer just about regulations. It was about equity, access, and justice for rural America. Top of form. As Musk's emotional testimony continued to resonate in the courtroom, the justices seemed to shift their focus from the technical aspects of the case to the broader implications for rural America. Musk had effectively framed the issue as not just a matter of orbital satellites, but of equity, of ensuring that millions of Americans in rural areas had the same access to the digital world as those in urban centers. But the legal battle was far from over. Now that Musk had laid out his personal connection to the issue, it was time for him to address the specific legal arguments. The proposed FCC regulations were at the heart of the dispute, and Musk made it clear that these rules would disproportionately affect the most isolated communities, places where traditional internet infrastructure wasn't an option. The regulations proposed by the FCC, Musk argued, would severely limit coverage for the very people who need it most. These rural areas depend on Starlink to connect to the digital economy, access education, and receive health care. As the court listened, the atmosphere had clearly shifted. What had once seemed like a technical regulatory case was now an urgent matter of social justice. Justice Barrett, who had been skeptical at the start, now expressed genuine engagement with Musk's perspective. "Mr. Musk," she said, acknowledging the new complexity of the case, "you've given us a lot to consider, and it's clear that this isn't just about satellites or regulations, it's about the real impact on people's lives." Musk continued, using the data and evidence from his filings to demonstrate that the FCC's technical justifications didn't align with the reality of rural connectivity needs. The FCC's own analysis, Musk noted, shows that reducing the number of satellites would primarily harm remote areas where internet access is already scarce. This isn't a theoretical problem, it's a real issue for people who are already left behind. The legal back and forth continued. But it was clear that the emotional and human dimension of the case had taken center stage. As the arguments wrapped up, it was evident that Musk had successfully reframed the conversation. What had started as a debate over regulatory science had transformed into a profound discussion about the role of technology in bridging the gap between urban and rural America. The justices had heard the technical arguments, but now they were grappling with something far more human. A call for digital inclusion and equity that could shape the future of telecommunications policy. The emotional weight of Musk's testimony lingered in the courtroom as the justices prepared to conclude the hearing. What had started as a dry legal debate had evolved into a heartfelt discussion about the real-world impacts of technology policy on rural America. As the final moments of the proceedings unfolded, Musk delivered a powerful closing argument that would forever change how the court viewed the case. "Justice Barrett," Musk said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his conviction, "you asked if I truly comprehend rural America's challenges. The truth is, no single person fully can. But what I do understand, through both personal experience and the thousands of stories shared with our team, is the profound human cost of digital isolation." With that, Musk went beyond the legal arguments and shared a fundamental truth. This case wasn't just about satellites or bandwidth. It was about the people whose lives depended on technology to access the most basic services. What the FCC's regulations fail to address, Musk continued, is that these are not just technical problems, they are human problems. Justice Barrett, visibly moved, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The moment, charged with emotion, marked a dramatic shift in the proceedings. The normally composed justice had been shaken by the human impact Musk had presented. As the courtroom fell silent, the weight of his words hung in the air, leaving a lasting impression. Chief Justice Roberts, recognizing the gravity of the moment, intervened, asking Musk to pivot back to the legal arguments, but the emotional foundation Musk had established was undeniable. As the legal battle progressed, it was clear that Musk had reframed the conversation from a technical dispute to a discussion about fairness, equity, and the digital divide. In the end, the justices didn't just rule on the legality of the FCC's regulations, they recognized the broader implications of their decision. The case ultimately resulted in a landmark ruling that required the FCC to reassess its approach, taking into account the needs of rural communities. The decision, penned by Justice Barrett, emphasized the importance of digital inclusion and set a new precedent for how technology policy would be shaped in the future. Musk's personal testimony not only changed the course of the case, it also shifted the public discourse on rural connectivity, making it a national priority. This Supreme Court moment had transformed the conversation around technology, law, and society, ensuring that the human impact of digital policy would never again be overlooked. And that's a wrap on this incredible game-changing moment in the Supreme Court. What began as a routine legal debate turned into a profound conversation about human impact and the future of rural connectivity. Elon Musk's heartfelt testimony not only shifted the course of the case but also reshaped how we think about technology policy, proving that sometimes it takes a personal story to change the world. This case has already started a nationwide conversation about digital inclusion, and its implications will be felt for years to come. Whether you're from a rural area or just someone passionate about technology and fairness, this is an issue that affects us all. If you found this deep dive valuable, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more insightful breakdowns, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. How do you think this case will change the way we view rural connectivity? We'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.